Respected President ICCR, Dr. Vinay Sahasrabuddhe, DG ICCR Shri Dinesh Patnaik ji, Ambassador Excellency Pradeep Kumar Rawat, who expressed his willingness to join but could not make it at the last moment. Respected scholars present in this webinar, listeners, my colleagues from the Embassy and the Gandhi Center, and dear friends, a warm welcome to you all on this webinar. Rabindranath Tagore, his contribution in the field of art and literature and its relevance today. Rabindranath Tagore was a prolific novelist, poet, painter, playwright, and a social reformer. This towering icon had deeply influenced the cultural ethos of not only Asia, but several other countries, far and wide. The first Asian to be awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. In the month of the poet's birthday, May 2021, the Gandhi Center organizes this webinar. We have amongst us Professor Mohan Gotham, Professor Barlett, Professor Baswati Bhattacharya, and myself from The Hague, Netherlands. Our honored speakers bring varied and interesting talks on Tagore, and I hope you continue to remain connected to this webinar. And at the end, we bring to you a small clipping from Tagore's dance drama, Chitrangada, by the beautiful K.R. Kar and her student Usha from Netherlands. Our first speaker today is Professor Mohan Gotham. Professor Mohan Gotham is known to everyone in the academic field. He has been the honorary chancellor and president, European University of West and East Netherlands. He's a vice global president, SM University for Netherlands, Seoul, South Korea. He's the chairman on International Commission on Museums and Cultural Heritage of the International Union. He's the president of IISSA. He's the European representative of Indian Diaspora Council, New York. He's a European member of Global Origin of the People of Indian Origin, GOPIO. He's the president of International Forum on the Hindu Studies, IFHS. Professor Gotham has examined about 80 PhD theses. His publications include 36 books and more than 150 articles in various languages. And several books are in the pipeline. His specialization is social, cultural, and structural anthropology, South Asian tribal studies, sociology, socio-linguistics, ethnicity, new Indo-Aryan languages, and Hindi literature. I welcome Professor Gotham to make his presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you listen me, please? Can you listen me?
Yeah, please go on, Professor Gotham.
Can you listen me? Can you listen me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, then it's all right. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Nirmala Sharma who has organized this beautiful webinar on Tagore. And I'm also happy that I would be taking a different view. And different view, how was the impact of Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore on Indian diaspora? This is the way I'll be looking at it. I need not to give the culture background of Rabindranath Tagore, which would be given by Professor Victor van Barlett and Baswati. And one thing is there, which I would like to say. I mean, not one thing, two, three things. A, why Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore did give some help to the new thinking for Indian diaspora. Now, very interesting thing is that he was from a family, and especially from his father, who was a well-known person, Maharishi Rabindranath Tagore, and he was also connected to Brahmo Samaj, and of course, directly or indirectly earlier to Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Now, this is the one thing which is known already to us. But the idea is that why did he start giving impact to Indian diaspora? And Indian diaspora, I meant here the indentured laborers who were sent from India to many colonial plantation countries, and there they did help in sugar plantation, cacao, bananas, etc. And after a contract of 5 years or 10 years, they returned to India. Now, at that time, it started in 1934 to 1916, about 1.5 million people migrated to other countries. The question is, and I think this is very important, Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, somewhere, of course, coming from a Zamindar family, landlord family, but he had a good contact with his neighbors, and his neighbors were also the tribal people, local people who were working in his fields, like he even had the indigo plantations. Now, so he did know there is something that people belong to somewhere, and that means that's a Bengal, because Bengal played a very, very big role. And he developed right from the very beginning, before writing his Gitanjali, a notion of symbiosis between the people. And the basic idea was the symbiosis should contact two things. One side, the traditions, and other side, the modernization. And I think this was the very important thing. And this he started in his Bolpur Shantiniketan University, that in which way we can bring the humanity together and we can live together. Now, very interesting thing is here that in this way, he preserved, promoted the Indian identity in a way, regional way, as well as all India. And very interesting thing is that before Gandhi started this Swadeshi movement, the things which are the produce of India, we should buy them. I think Rabindranath Tagore was the first person that he did participate and helped the Swadeshi movement. This is another thing, I will also come there. Then another thing which I would like to also mention here, that of course, He was brought up with the Indian traditions, but he did know a lot about
Please unmute yourself, Dr. Gotham. Yes, start.
Thank you very much. So I was telling that two places were known to him. One was Bhawanipur and other was Garden Reach, from where the migrants or the emigrants were sent to the plantation colonies. And he also did know that the migration or emigration to these indentured laborers, or they were also called derogatory coolies, they were exploited by our own Indian people, as well as the own Indian family system, which was a part of the caste system. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is here that he went to England and he learned many things in England. He met people like Shyam Kishore Burma, who was invited actually by Wheeler through Dayanand Saraswati. And he also knew the members of the National Indian Association, like Bhai Parmanand, Lala Hardyal, who started the Gadar, the revolution type of magazine in United States, and Lala Hardyal, and very, very well-known person, Bhavani Dayal Sannyasi, who was in Africa, in Fiji and Mauritius, and of course, Bipin Chandrapal. There are so many names, I cannot tell them, but he met them. He met Indians. He saw very minutely the conditions of Indians in England. After coming to Calcutta, there he came to know some more things. Like there was an incident in 1930, Gora Gata Maru ship, which was held near Vancouver, and people were not allowed to come. And once they came back, most of them was arrested and sent even to unknown islands. One of them was very important person, Bhai Parmanand, but he was then helped by Andrew, Freer Andrew, who was also a helpful friend to Gandhi as well as Tagore. Now, telling all these things, there's another thing which he found out very important. When he was in Netherlands in 1920, and he gave a lecture in Kern Institute, he met a person which was called Bake. Bake, of course, I have also known to him, and he was influenced by Tagore, and he even took him with his wife to Indonesia. And then he went to study music. Like there was another person later on, Hoboken, he also studied music, and he was in Shantiniketan. Now, very important thing is here that around 1901, there was a conference of Congress Party in Calcutta, And Gandhi also went from South Africa to attend the conference and tell about the South African Indian indentured contractors, the labor. And a very interesting thing is he went via Mauritius, so he also did know about the Mauritius people's Indian conditions. And in South Africa, when he moved out to India, he was not known at all in India. And it is said that Tagore had a chance to meet him and listen his brief note about the South Africa. So he knew the South Africa, Mauritius, and many countries, the Indians are getting the problems. And another thing which happened there, which actually created the Swadeshi movement in Calcutta, that was the division of Bengal. Bengal was divided by Curzon, which was not nice. And there was a big movement in Calcutta, and people took an oath in a Calcutta hall that we would not buy the Indian, we will not buy the European or the British goods, only the Indian goods. At that time, he was also influenced by the Bande Matram, which was written by Bankim Chand Chatterjee. He and people say, I do not know, his eldest sister, Swan Kumari, who wrote this, the beautiful first novel. They sang the song Bande Matram. So the Swadeshi idea, the nationalist idea started there. Of course, very interesting thing happened here, that he also wrote afterwards something, because many people also went from Bengal. It was the Bengal presidency actually before that. And there was even a place called Kuli Bazar. It was near the harbor, and people were collected there and they were also sent there. So what I'm trying to say, that he started writing from his own point of view, Amar Sonar Bangla. I mean, this was one of the nicest poems which gave the new type of nationalism, the regional nationalism, to the many people. And then he also wrote a novel called Gora, which was based on an orphan from Ireland, and he became a sort of Bengali Brahmin. And then how did he adjust the modernization and tradition? This also became a very important piece for many Indians. Now, if we move further, what in his this symbiosis Gurudev tried to explain was this: the ecology should be maintained. Without ecology, there's nothing. But the ecology should also have some way of working, and that should be the traditions, the cultures which are created, and family is one of them. And these ideas he gave, and so he developed man as a globalized unity of religion. That was it. He also wrote many the books on religion, ecology, and many other ideas. And then, of course, when Lord Viceroy Hardinge was there in 1960, and when the emigration was dissolved, there he was also part of the game, that he did know what's going on. Now, another thing is, he did not write many things, but it is known from other writings that he did know like Modern Review used to come, where Hardyal used to write about the Indians. So he did know a lot about the Indians. And if I give you an example afterwards, like there was a person called Munshirahman Khan who died in at the age of 98 in Suriname. He did know. He even read the book Gora. He used to have the contact with the Venkateshwar press in Bombay. Similarly, I met Chedi Jagan personally, and he also very much influenced by Gurudev. And he said that if Gurudev would have been here, things would have been different for us. Anyway, this psychological urge to be united with traditions and modernity, where there should not be any discrimination, where there should not be any social hierarchy, he was the man, he tried to promote it. And of course, Burma also he did know a lot, because Sharat Chand Chatterjee considered him his guru. And he wrote a lot in Bengali, afterwards translated into Hindi. Similarly, in Mauritius, of course, he was in 1901, but people did know about him. And he was asked to, he was not there, Gandhi was there. Gandhi and Gurudev, Rabindranath Tagore, they talked and they discussed many things. And they, the Gandhiji also told about what the things are in Mauritius. I mean, Ram Ghulam, I know, I met him. He was very, very much influenced by him. Now we can go and talk a lot. I mean, being a Pirali Brahmin from Kannauj side, because his forefathers Narayan Bhatt came there, but he did know the British administrators in Calcutta, the scholars in Calcutta, and of course, missionaries like Heber, Boding, etc. I mean, so he did know about the conditions of the laborers who went out. There is one thing which I would like to say, and that is, there was also a book on Fiji. Totaram Sanad, he wrote a book on 21 days in Fiji. He also came to know about that book because Fraser, Andrew Fraser, told him. One thing I found out, I have visited many migrant plantation communities. And the interesting thing is that I visited in 60s, I know people used to tell, if Rabindranath Tagore would have been alive, I think our life would have been different. We would be spiritual, we would be practical, and we would be devoted to our belongingness. And the symbiosis was a term which he said that you should belong to somewhere. You may be born anywhere. That was the basic idea. I would only say that he wanted to have a very good idea, and that he said to the people indirectly. There is an Urdu share, a part of couplet. आदमी को भी मैसर नहीं होता इंसान होता. I mean, we want to be the human being, but sometimes it's not possible because there are so many problems are coming. And I think if Gurudev would have been alive, perhaps his story would have listened by many people. There's another couplet in Urdu. बड़े शौक से सुन रहा था जमाना, अरे तुम ही सो गए दास्तां कहते कहते. People were listening to you. People wanted to react. People wanted to change their life, change their mind for freedom. But you disappear. But your memories will continue. And we would try with our generation to be a part of the Indian belongingness and learn from your ideas. I think this is, I would like to say. Thank you very much.
Alles mag gezegd worden hier. Zeker, zeker. Nicky zei ook van, Thomas is niet alleen. Ik ben 28 en slaap nog steeds veel lekkerder met mijn knuffels. Mijn vriend betrap ik er zelf soms op dat hij ze s'nachts van...
Have you heard more or no? You want to listen more? No. No, I'm just waiting. Maybe Professor Basmati.
Yeah,
or-
thank you. Thanks. Can Dr. Baswati start, please?
Heel veel tegenstanders, zwart-wit. Ja, he did love it. Anka die zegt, ik het wel mooi om te trekken. Anders was ik mensen overigens nooit veel overtuigen.
I need to be able to share the screen. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you hear me?
Try now.
Yeah, it does. It does just work. Okay. Yeah. Screen sharing. Yeah. Before. Okay. Stop screen sharing. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank Professor Nirmala Sharma and Gandhi Center for giving me this opportunity to address you all. I would like to talk about Tego in the Netherlands. Tego came to the Netherlands in 1920. Last year, it was the centenary year of his visit. So what I'm trying to do is to find media reports, that is newspaper reports on him, and try to retell that story of his visit and what he wanted. The year 2020 marked the centenary of the visit of Rabindranath Tagore to the Netherlands. After he was awarded the Nobel Prize, Tagore traveled to more than 30 countries. Accounts of his tours of other countries are available in detail. But as regards the Netherlands, apart from the schedule during his stay here and the fact that Tagore was very pleased with his reception in this country, not much is known. What did the Dutch really think about him? Was there any discussion among his peer group regarding his visit? Scholars working on Tego have underlined that in the West, the poet has been consistently misunderstood, misrepresented, sometimes ignored, and in many respects diminished as a writer and thinker. How did the media reflect on his visit or the speeches he delivered? While reading the media reports, it is my intention to understand what was registered in these reports and what they tell us about the contemporary Dutch society. We all know that Tego had founded a school at Shantiniketan in 1901. Since he expressed his wish to set up a center of human studies across parochial, cultural, national, and geographical boundaries in 1916, one of his major objectives of traveling abroad was to accumulate funds necessary for achieving this goal. A university had already been founded there in 1918, but spreading his educational ideas in the West and raising funds for his goal was the purpose of his Europe and America tour of 1920. He arrived in the Netherlands on 19th of September and left for Belgium on the 2nd of October. It is usually thought that Tego was invited to the Netherlands by Frederik van Eeden. According to a report in Algemeen Handelsblad, a leading daily from Amsterdam, Mr. Brands, their correspondent that is a correspondent of Algemeen Handelsblad, in London had interviewed Tagore there in June. Before Tagore came to the Netherlands, he was in London, in England. So Brands interviewed him there in June. And Tagore's position on colonial education and nationalism induced him to ask the poet if he would be willing to address the Dutch audience on these issues, and Tego obliged. Tego was a familiar name in the Netherlands even before he was awarded the Nobel Prize. The famous Dutch writer Frederik van Eyde had read the English translation of Gitanjali, and he felt so akin to the poems that he began translating them. Going into several prints, this translation, Vaijangan, followed by Kabir and Sadhana, captured the, I think Kabir and Sadhana, I don't have, okay, yeah. Captured popular imagination. His poetry contained the message people wanted to hear. The reports in the media, while commenting on Tego and his different speeches, also reflect the tension due to the conflicting religio-political and sectarian ideas governing the then Dutch society, which was quite new to me. Since the late 19th century, and especially since the 1870s, the Dutch society was pillarized or divided into 4 parallel groups based on religious belief and philosophy of life: Protestants, Catholics, Socialists, and Liberals. The goal of these politically powerful groups was to put their philosophy of life and religious ideas into practice through socio-cultural and political activities. Each of these groups had its own political party, school, broadcasting system, newspaper, trade union, etc. To give one example, Tagore was officially invited by the Theosophical Society and the Vrije Gemeente Church of Amsterdam, a liberal fraction of the Reformed Protestant Church. And Algemeen Handelsblad was in many ways related to these groups. These organizations announced the invitation and Tagore's willingness to accept the same in different newspapers. A reception committee was organized to arrange and coordinate Tagore's program during his stay here. While the said 2 organizations were responsible for one talk in Amsterdam, in Amersfoort and The Hague, the International School of Philosophy and the Theosophical Society, respectively, were in charge. This is an announcement of one of the talks Tego gave here. Soon after this was announced, the announcement was made. The Catholics actually announced that they would not facilitate Tagore's tour. When Tego informed Van Eyden from London about his plan to visit the Netherlands, Van Eyden had initially suggested that Tego stayed at his place as his guest. They had been corresponding since Van Eyden began translating Tego. They were corresponding with each other. But Tego was being accompanied by his son Rabindranath, daughter-in-law Pratima Devi, and his secretary, Mr. W.W. Pearson. So the welcoming committee organizing Tagore's tour arranged for the guest stay at a villa in Duinen, owned by Cornelis van Eycken, who was the director and owner and director of the Algemene Nederlandse Bank, and his wife, Mary Boissevin, she was a theosophist. Van Eyden was disappointed because he was looking forward to literary discussions with the world poet at the quiet of his house. But he was anxious because putting up Tagore in an exclusive secluded villa owned by an by a banker implied that Tagore would not be accessible to other than those who shared the politico-religious dispensations of the liberal Protestant and Theosophist organizations. In a weekly column in Amsterdam, a magazine Van Eyden edited, he recounted on 22nd September the conversation he supposedly had with one of the organizers he referred to simply as a mammon, the god of wealth. As a socialist utopian, Van Eyden was afraid that the character of the welcoming committee would determine whom Tego would meet. Let me quote a paragraph from that column. Then came Mammon with his friendly smile and said, "See, this splendid villa in ideal surroundings, civilized, well-to-do, and meticulously organized people, women of noble birth, and learned men. 3 cars will be at the poet's disposal to take him quickly and safely wherever he wants to go to, and to bring to his place all the sensitive and wise people he would like to meet. What is the problem?" In a situation that needed a quick assessment and response, I answered, "Why, of course, dear Mammon, all problems will be taken care of this way. But can we count on impartiality on your behalf? I know, for example, that in the US, you successfully prevented Upton Sinclair, the socialist writer, journalist, and political activist working among the poor migrant workers, from seeing the poet." The Mammon responded with the usual jovial irony. "Aren't you offending your exalted and noble friend Tego with such misgivings? Is his wisdom not soaring high above the chaotic issues of land ownership, exchange rates, trade in funds, suffrage, and the like?" I answered again, "Of course, but should he not get detailed information about major movements at the heart of the bewildered jostling on the left and the right? And will it be possible for me to take the Jewish communist writer David Joseph Weinkoop, our socialist poet Hermann Korter, and Mrs. Henriette Goverdine, Anna Roland Holst, along to the house of the director of the Netherlands Bank? Shall I get the opportunity to arrange a meeting between Tego and one of our highest ranking Catholic prelates for an in-depth discussion? I feel I should withdraw myself." Van Eyde was a member of the welcoming committee, but he wanted to withdraw himself. In the column here. Was Frederick Van Eyden the only person dissatisfied with the organization of the trip? Or was that the only aspect of the tour that generated a sharp, ironical response? The answer to the first question is uncertain, and to the second question is negative. Europe was devastated during the First World War, and post-war Europe was seeking some message of peace from the Orient. The carefully styled attire of Tego, the creator of the devotional poems, was seen as a saint from the Orient preaching new gospel. This was a source of tension among Catholics and Orthodox Protestants, because this was also the time when people were gradually losing interest in religion and churches. Catholics, as we have seen above, were not interested in Tagore's trip, and the genuine interest showed by people in Tagore's lectures made Orthodox Protestants nervous. They compared him with Jesus and observed that the large following of Tagore was unaware that much of what Tagore said could be found already in the New Testament. The objectives and the scope of Tagore's visit were limited, as some of the reports pointed out, but they provide splendid instances of imperatives, perspectives, and ideological biases guiding the contemporary Dutch notion regarding the Orient and the Oriental. Not only Persian rugs were borrowed for decorating venues to express an appreciation worthy of the distinguished guest, but he was constantly referred to as a wise man from the Orient. One columnist even thought that Tagore was a poet from Persia. Tagore's message of universal humanity is more relevant now than in post-World War I world. We are living in a time when more and more countries in the West are facing the threat of falling prey to a brand of nationalism Tagore stood against. Tego believed in a harmony between human and nature, building the fundamentals of education at his school. He was against mere imitation of the West. To him, that was a weakness. He was dismayed at the ravaging impact of human use of modern science and technology on environment. Now, Shell has just recently been instructed to drastically reduce its footprint within less than a decade. Judging by the developments in our contemporary world, one can state that Rabindranath was a light year ahead of his times. And viewing from his perspectives, the East and the West now are frighteningly, yet the East and the West now frighteningly yet perfectly vie with each other on their respective side of the scale. The mission inspiring Tego in 1920 is still incomplete. The mission of meeting of the East and the West. Thank you.
If you can start, Mr. Victor.
Yes, also from me once more, many thanks to the Gandhi Center to give me the opportunity to address you. My talk will be on the relevance of Tagore in the West, 2021. To doubt and question the relevance of a famous European writer of global stature seems a rather silly and superfluous thing to do. Suppose someone would question the relevance of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe for the German language or for European literature. Or if someone would seriously doubt the relevance of Shakespeare for the English-speaking world, we would feel supremely puzzled by such stances. Of course, Goethe is relevant, if only because of the sheer volume of his high-quality writings in German, and the fame he already enjoyed during his lifetime. Nobody questions the importance of the plays and poems of William Shakespeare for the English language, even if some postmodern critics may question all manner of moral lapses on the part of Shakespeare. Not feminist enough, not anti-racist enough, too anti-Semitic, etc., etc. But even such critiques reveal that the author was important enough to merit this attention. When we turn to famous writers from the non-West, things seem quite different. In order to command Western contemporary interest or respect, these non-Western writers have to be relevant for our little Western corner of the global society. Rabindranath Tagore unfortunately falls in the category of allegedly famous but exotic personalities, and he had the ill fortune not to have emerged from the heart of the Western metropolis. Even in his own country, India, it took the Nobel Prize to make him into a poet and writer of truly pan-Indian stature. Before the Nobel Prize in 1913, Tagore was just a well-known Bengali poet, writer, and even leader of opinion, but only within his own linguistic area, Bengal. Tagore was, in a way, disadvantaged by his use of a regional Indian language, and this was in spite of his unmistakably huge artistic talents. Does all this mean that the question we pose, what is the relevance of Tagore in the West, is an irrelevant or illegitimate question? Or should we not ask this and simply assume he was great and leave it at that? I think not. We can ask the question, and part of the answer, which I will try to give, will repeat to some extent what every Tagore lover or Tagore expert will tell you. That Tagore was a genius may not have been well known outside his native Bengal. It was known among his Bengali readers. He wrote extensively and of high literary quality. He wrote Bengali poems and plays in verse from when he was around 14 years old. Volumes of more mature poetry started to be published from when he was about 20. From the 1880s onwards, he produced a veritable stream of books of poetry, song texts which he himself set to music, short stories, dance dramas, comedies, novels, literary essays, religious essays, essays on social and political issues. This stream of production continued unabated until his death in 1941. He dictated his very last poetry on his deathbed. After 1913, when Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, he made sure that the stream of literature he produced also included a sizable amount of English texts, near translations of his Bengali poetry, translations of his plays, original essays in English, articles, addresses, lectures delivered in many countries, and some original English poetry. While this collected Bengali writings run into more than 10,000 pages in print, even his English texts run in about 2,000 pages, close print. And then you have to add the dozens or so volumes of published letters in Bengali, his 2,000 songs, and what most people may easily forget, from his 50th, he became an internationally acclaimed painter as well, with hundreds, if not thousands of paintings, drawings, and artful doodles. In the 1930s, Tagore's paintings were shown in various international exhibitions, also in Europe. And yet we are still faced with the question how Tagore can still be relevant in the West. Clearly, the Nobel Prize put his persona on the world stage. The only thing the non-Bengali public, among whom many Indians as well, knew in 1913 was the little volume of English poems in prose titled Gitanjali, Song Offering. The booklet, which appeared in 1912, took the Western world as by storm. Some members of the Nobel Prize Committee who bestowed the prize on Tagore were aware of his importance as a Bengali poet, but this was just an aside. Somehow or other, Tagore had captured a feeling in his English poems that resonated well with Europeans. It was as if he sensed the coming of the slaughterhouse of the World War I, and with his poems had shown that there are areas in human experience that go beyond national pride, violence, oppression, and tyranny. Tagore had already started to regard the colonizing West as a force of greed and aggression, not as a force of great civilization and humanism. And this was long before the advent on the world stage of Tagore. In Europe, he was often regarded in almost prophetic terms, an obvious sage and an archetypal poet from the East, with a message of spiritual freedom, a message of realization of what's best in the human personality, an undogmatic religious message, and a message of the deep global brotherhood of all human beings. In brief, a message of pacifism. This persona Tagore himself also cultivated. It screened off his many other artistic accomplishments, especially the qualities of his Bengali writings. Hardly anyone in those days took the trouble of learning Tagore's native language, and some of the English texts did him a disservice. But this is the opinion of present-day Tagore scholars. One could see the relevance of Tagore for the world outside his native Bengal, especially when he acted as an ambassador of Indian culture to a Western world that was still the colonial master in much of Asia and Africa. In order to explain Tagore's relevance, one cannot point to a particular set of his writings, although they are rewarding reading and are neglected. One cannot point to his music, for instance, for it really takes effort to become a connoisseur. One cannot even point to his paintings, for they are probably largely forgotten outside India. Perhaps the full gamut of Tagore's relevance for the world takes decades to be fully appreciated. After all, for non-Bengalis, the many writings of Tagore are only accessible through fresh translations. This is a huge task, but it is slowly being done. However, it requires many years of patient work and many able translators to present all of his writings to a global public. Interestingly enough, in the 1960s, in the then Soviet Union, many volumes of direct translations from Bengali into Russian were published and apparently catered to a Russian public demand. And from the 1990s onwards, the German writer and translator Martin Kempchen, who knows Bengali very well, has published several large volumes of translations directly from Bengali into German. I believe this trend in the Western world of fresh translations directly from Bengali into European language of Tagore's works was started by the English scholar of Bengali and himself a poet, William Radice. His selected poems of Tagore, published in 1985, was a landmark. This book has run into several editions. The latest appeared in 2005. It shows, if anything, that Tagore's poetry has not yet died, provided it is offered to the reading public in an appropriate form, respecting the canons of good poetry as you would in the case of translating any other great poet into another language. In conclusion, what does the general public aware of Tagore think about him? Last year, there was a small international gathering of Tagore fans in Amsterdam. During the gathering, a small opinion poll was conducted about what motifs you associate most with Tagore. One could choose from different options like unity and diversity, education, freedom and independent thinking, music, tranquility amidst daily worries, imagination and creativity. The items that got most of the votes was freedom and independent thinking. So this may actually be the perceived relevance of Tagore in the West and beyond. It is perhaps for this reason that Tagore's English poem, most often quoted in India itself, begins with the words, "Where the mind is without fear and the head held high." Let me end by reading my own translation of the original Bengali sonnet of the same poem, which appeared in the volume Neubeddo, which was published in 1901. Where thought is fearless and the head held high, knowledge free, where the walls of a house do not day and night limit the wide earth to the petty strip of land in the inner courtyard, where speech bursts out from the fountain of the heart, where the stream of action always flows unhindered in every direction, over every land, towards 1,000 great accomplishments, where the stream of thinking does not dry up completely in the desert sand of trivial customs, where vigor is not cut to pieces, where joyfully you always lead our actions and our thoughts. Father, with your own hand, strike without mercy and awaken India to such a heaven. Thank you.
Professor Victor van Bijlert, that was a wonderful talk. I thank you very much for this presentation. And I also thank Professor Mohan Gotham, Professor Baswati Bhattacharya. I'm extremely sorry. I went through some technical problem and I have to join through my mobile now. Thanks a lot for all this. And well, I come to my part of the speech, my talk. And my well, before I actually come to my talk, which has been delayed, let me rather introduce our previous speakers. Professor Baswati Bhattacharya is a senior academic fellow affiliated with the Center for Modern Indian Studies at George August University, Göttingen. She is a historian of early modern and modern India and an alumni of the prestigious Vishwa Bharati, founded by Rabindranath Tagore. How fortunate we are to have you, Professor Baswati Bhattacharya, here, straight from Vishwa Bharati. Two of her recent works are a large social historical monograph on the culture of Indian coffee houses. Very interesting. Much Ado Over Coffee, Indian Coffee House, Then and Now, which was by Social Science Press, Ruth Lesh. And Globalizing Everyday Commodity in India, History and Ethnography, again, Ruth Lesh, 2020. She's currently preparing a monograph on Tego's visit to the Netherlands in 1920. And indeed, we are very fortunate to have a scholar exclusively who works on Tego. Professor Victor van Bijlert is an associate professor for Indian religions and Sanskrit at the Faculty of Theology of the Vrije University, Amsterdam. He researches and writes mostly on Indian culture, political history, religions, and philosophy. One of his special interests is Rabindranath Tagore, some of whose Bengali writings he has translated into English and Dutch. His most recent publications are a monograph entitled Vedantic Hinduism in Colonial Bengal with Ruth Lesh 2020. And he contributed a chapter on Tagore's and Swami Vivekananda's view on Buddha. In the edited volume, Culture as Power, also published by Ruth Lesh 2021. I also thank Professor Mohan Gotham for his very interesting talk, which I heard completely. Now comes my turn of my presentation. I am Professor Nirmala Sharma, the director of the Gandhi Center and art historian who works mainly on Buddhism. I am going to talk on the paintings of Rabindranath Tagore, which I had this talk in China when I was a professor in Shenzhen University. when we had Tagore's annual exhibition, a grand exhibition which had come from the ICCR. Rabindranath Tagore took to painting at a late stage in his life. Some manuscripts dating back to his youth show doodles in the margins, as Professor Barlett also mentioned. So some of his manuscripts did show doodles in the margin, which suggested a natural flair for drawing. When he was well over 60, fantastic forms began to appear in his manuscripts. And as time passed, paintings and calligraphic drawings begin to appear as independent efforts unrelated to manuscripts. We can wait for the illustrations. Blue-black ink gave to transparent color, and the subjects, you see, blue-black ink, which used for writing, was merged with water. So they gave a transparent color, and the subject became more and more varied. The output clearly suggests that Rabindranath Tagore was absorbed in his new pursuit and was enjoying the experience. The lack of formal training was compensated by an instinctive feel for rhythm, texture, and spacing. There was also the calligraphic virtuosity when he used the pen. It was not the painter's hand of free brushstrokes. In fact, it was the hand of a writer who arranged letters carefully in his text with great thought. You could clearly see the writer in his drawings. His special field remained the portraits and exaggerating the simple, typical features to a high level of prominence. His portraits were of women, usually the ladies at home, and the ones that came around met him and were in constant touch with him. And he portrayed in an infinity of moods and expressions ranging from sullen and sombre to the calm and contained, and rare instances of the joyful or the merry. However, whichever be the particular expression, the painted faces invariably exude a feeling of untold mystery, as if the whole of a personality is beyond complete comprehension. The lack of anatomy did not matter, since in the best of examples, the total effect mattered. His works, drawings and paintings numbered over 2,000. Considering the late start in this work, this makes for an astonishing output, but not simple. To my personal experience, a great thinker doodles. He's thinking while he doodles, which are stages of coming out of a thought and going into another thought. The coming out stage is when you observe a form in the doodle and bring that form out, which then becomes a drawing. Rabindranath Tagore was not influenced by any painting or a painter. He had his own style, which does not stem from any tradition, but is truly original. Rabindranath has been one of the world's remarkable human beings, a poet, dramatist, novelist, short story writer, song composer, painter, philosopher, educationist, essayist. He has touched nothing that he has not adored, or can say whatever he touched, he added soul into it. Tagore appears to have taught himself most of what he came to know by his innate power of observation and intuitive understanding and very extensive reading. The Tego family took to the lead in creating a modern movement in painting from 1890s. It began with Abhanindranath, Rabindranath's nephew, who formed a close association with E.B. Havell, the Swadeshi-minded British principal of the Government Art School in Calcutta. He wrote one of the earliest, The Aesthetics of Classical Indian Art, just after the turn of the century. Abhanindranath and his little later Gaganindranath, his brother, formed with Nandalal Bose what became known by 1910 as the Bengal revival of art. Tagore's art began as an unconscious process, but very quickly became collaboration between the consciousness and the unconsciousness. I would like to show you some slides here of Tagore's works and how they evolved. Can we have some slides, please? This is the self-portrait, and you can see how, if you see, these appear more like text rather than paintings, because you see the pen moving about and then little merging with the colors. So this is one which is very calligraphic. Can we have another one? Here he steps into, it's the bird, he steps into actually the later stage where he has begun to use colors into his works. Next one. This is a clear indication of a work wherein he started to doodle about and found a figure there. And when the doodle happened to, he created that form in that, an animal on which a man is seated, and to close, cover the flaws, rather, the doodles of the tree, just, covering the animal can be seen here. So this is actually very much like an expression coming out of his doodlings. Next one, please. A very beautiful portrait. And you can see he picked up characteristics and emphasized the typical characteristics and a figure type. And here you can see the eyes. You see, if you see the mysterious eyes and you see the kind of a nose, you see the structures that he emphasized, the structure, the features to a large extent, and lovely colors, space divisions by different colors, not very bright, but subdued colors. So you can see sections of colors and his typical characteristics of line doodles, scribblings can be seen here very clearly. Next one. I love this painting. Why? Because you see, it is a figure of a woman rather with a covered sarong on her head, or kind of a pallu, but so very well still revealing the image. Next one. These figures are very interesting, where you see a lot of expression on the faces, and these don't come from the doodles, but are later works wherein he did use doodling, but then he used his inks to cover up spaces and define the image. Next one. This is his earlier works where he kept doodling, and then found an image, brought it up, and colored it. His, as I mentioned, his portraits are very expressive. And this one is very expressive, where he really enhances the features of the individual. Next one. This is typically not much with the pen work, but it is scribbling with his complete with a brush, and then trying to find out figures by painting the background, enhancing the figures by painting the background and bringing out the images. Next one. This is a landscape, where his landscapes were not different from his other subjects. But here you can see that the background of the light color to show the dense forest and a light piercing through the forest. You see, if you see, it is having, that becomes the focal point the focal point, and the light pierces the canvas, the picture. He never used canvases. He used sketchbooks to do his works, and they were small though. And this is very beautiful. How the somber mood of the mother and the child are very well depicted through doodles, and then a background to enhance, a dark background to enhance that particular image, to bring it up, and still keeping the scribblings and doodlings at the background. It's a very beautiful, one of Tagore's best works. This one. This is again, he used a technique, you see, he used a technique of doodling and scribbling. And then, you know, after that, he tried to bring out an image by using a wash, ink wash. Sometimes just the doodles with water created a plain surface. And sometimes he added a bit of ink to that. So you can see that here, initially he has used a wash technique with a brush on his doodles. So the ink, which was with the pen, spread out into the in the background, and the image came ahead. Next one. As his expressions and portraits, he has done several portraits, as I mentioned to you, bringing out characteristics. This one is totally with his pen. Creating depth and highlights. It's a beautiful work. This is again very interesting, wherein he uses different color inks and colors. So you can still see the writer in him here, because he for the blue and red, he has used inks here, and then he's used color for the orange, and again painted the background dark to bring out the images. It's a very interesting and one of the most beautiful paintings ever done by Rabindranath Tagore. You can see the beautiful face, and I'm sure that maybe we could identify the character also in this work. It's one of the most beautiful portraits. Again, deep forest, dense forest, light piercing through the forest, and then you can see small trees. Very well done. Tagore in self-portrait again. He has done a lot of self-portraits. Next one. This again comes out of his doodles, and you can see that creature created and a bird on his bird on the back of that animal. Next one. Tego began to do flowers also, and along with this independent flowers, and also flower in vases and flowers along with portraits here. Thank you very much. I thank all the speakers today, and the Professor Mohan Gotham, Professor Baswati Bhattacharya for the lovely talk, Professor Victor van Barlett. Tego wrote his first drama opera, Valmiki Pratibha, when he was barely 20. He went on to write over 2,000 songs and create Rabindra Sangeet as an important genre of Bengali music that is named after the poet himself. Let us watch a short clipping from Chitrangada. And as we come to the end of the webinar, I thank the speakers, I thank the lovely listeners. With this, we come to the end of the webinar, but please enjoy the performance before you leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The story goes on.
Thank you very much. Namaskar.